features the paintings and drawings of artist Erich Lichtblau-Leskly that were created during the years of 1942 to 1945 when he was a prisoner in Theresienstadt, which had qualities of both a ghetto and a concentration camp. Erich bravely and clandestinely created these paintings to show the realities of daily life. Fearing for his life after other Theresienstadt artists were rounded up and deported, Erich cut up most of his paintings to destroy them. His wife, Elsa, took the fragments of his artwork and hid them underneath the wooden floorboards of her barracks, where they survived the war and she was able to retrieve them. This exhibition contains 3 components: the original fragments that survived the war, an example of which we can see here on the left, images that Erich restored in Czechoslovakia during the 1950s, which we can see here in the center image, and recreations of the artwork made in Israel during the 1970s and 80s, which is seen here on the right. Before we dive into the exhibition more, let me first tell you a little bit more about Erich and his wife, Elsa. Erich was born on June 16, 1911 in Czechoslovakia, which at that time was Austria-Hungary. He worked decorating store windows, later pursued studies in commercial design, and ended up working as a commercial decorator. In March of 1937, Erich married Elsa. At the end of 1938, Erich and Elsa moved first to Prague, where Erich worked on construction, and then to southern Bohemia, which was invaded and occupied by the Nazis soon after. In southern Bohemia, Erich and Elsa joined a Zionist youth group that was carrying out agricultural training in preparation for emigration to Palestine. Approximately 4 years later, Erich and Elsa received transport orders and arrived in Theresienstadt on November 26, 1942. You can see the deportation list here with their names included in boxes in the bottom left corner. Theresienstadt was a cruel and harsh world for the prisoners who lived there. It was historically a fortress town created in the 1780s by Austrian Emperor Joseph II and served as a military garrison town. It is often referred to as 2 names, Terezín, which is the Czech name, and Theresienstadt, which is the German name. The Nazis chose Theresienstadt as a location for a ghetto as it was close to a railway station and easy to guard since there were already fortifications in place. Theresienstadt had qualities of both a concentration camp and a ghetto, and it existed for about 3.5 years. Theresienstadt had 3 main roles: a transit camp, a ghetto labor camp, and a propaganda tool. It became a transit camp for Czech Jews who were deported to killing centers, concentration camps, and other forced labor camps, a ghetto labor camp and holding pen for certain categories of German, Austrian, and Czech Jews, namely those who were elderly, veterans, artists, or other prominent cultural figures who might be missed from society, both local and abroad, if they suddenly disappeared. And in German propaganda terms, it served as a model ghetto. Since it seemed implausible that elderly Jewish people could be used for forced labor, the Nazis utilized Theresienstadt to hide the nature of their deportations. In their propaganda, Theresienstadt was thus described as a model ghetto and a spa town where elderly Jewish people were sent to retire in safety. This was far from the reality of what was actually happening there. Of the approximately 140,000 people who passed through the walls of Theresienstadt, about 90,000 were deported to killing centers and concentration camps out east, and 33,000 died of malnutrition, disease, and starvation in Theresienstadt itself. What is unique about Theresienstadt is that amidst all of the horror of death, starvation, and deportations that I just mentioned, there was also a level of cultural and social life present that other ghettos and camps did not have. The horrors of daily life were always present, while at the same time there were certain privileges allotted of entertainment, social life, and religion. As author Marjorie Lamberti says in her article, Making Art in the Terezin Concentration Camp, there was a bizarre quality of Terezin, a world in which the pursuit of the arts coexisted with conditions of extreme inhumanity, and where there was an oscillation from an atmosphere of apparent normalcy to an atmosphere laden with fear and terror. The presence of this cultural and social life was due in part to the large number of musicians, composers, writers, artists, and conductors who were deported to Theresienstadt, where their will to create was something that the Nazis could not destroy. The Nazis also allowed these cultural events to take place as it promoted their propaganda of Theresienstadt as a model ghetto and a spa town where the select, privileged few could live and continue their way of life. Here, we see an image of Erich's work called The Crooner of Theresienstadt, Hambo the pop hit singer. The image on the left was Erich's recreation from Israel created in the 1970s and 80s, and the image in the background is the original image from Theresienstadt. This image features the pop hit singer Harry Hambo Heyman, who was well known for accompanying his songs with an accordion or a violin. Hambo came to Theresienstadt with the Danish transport and became a great attraction, performing many popular songs. The song he sings here in Erich's work is more mournful, as the lyrics say, I am dying, tra-la-la, tra-la-la. When Erich and Elsa arrived in Theresienstadt in 1942, Erich was put to work in the construction yard, and Elsa was sent to work cleaning children's homes and working in the kitchen. For Erich, working in the construction yard was a strategic and life-saving decision, as construction workers were deemed essential employees and spared from deportation. Elsa's job in the kitchen also was a more privileged position, as she had close access to the most valuable commodity inside the ghetto, food. Sometime later, Erich was also assigned to work in the graphic and reproduction workshop, a subdivision of the technical department of the ghetto. Here, he worked on many design projects, including set designs for the ghetto theater. This new job gave him access to the art supplies that he needed to create his artwork. A common theme in many of Erich's artwork is food, and those who had access to food were deemed to be the wealthiest in the ghetto, like the three kings shown here: the pastry chef, the baker, and the cook. Sitting atop their heads are their chef hat crowns, complete with stars of David, and they brandish loaves of bread and buns and the tools of their trade, in this case, a wooden spoon. In a world where many were starving, those who handled food were deemed to be the richest. The image on the left is one of the few examples in the exhibition of a restored work that Erich made in Czechoslovakia, and the image on the right is the finished piece from the Israeli period. There were two pivotal events that occurred in Theresienstadt during 1944. First, the Nazis discovered drawings and paintings made by a group of ghetto prisoners that were known as the Painters' Circle. The group was composed of former artists, architects, a doctor, and an art dealer, some of whose pictures and names are shown here. The members of this group were rounded up and incarcerated in Theresienstadt's so-called Little Fortress, the structure in which they housed political prisoners. There they were interrogated, beaten, and tortured. One of the artists, Otto Unger's right hand was crushed and two of his fingers had to be amputated. After the interrogation, all of them were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Leo Haus was the only survivor from the group. Their capture stemmed from their artwork, some examples of which are shown here. Their paintings and drawings depicted the ugly realities of life inside Theresienstadt, and some of them had been smuggled out and into the hands of the public. The Nazis were specifically worried and suspected that the artwork might have ended up in the hands of the International Red Cross Commission, which was very problematic for the Nazis, who did not want the reality of devastation inside the ghetto to be made known to the broader world, and especially the Red Cross. The second pivotal moment comes shortly after this, in June of 1944. At the end of the previous year, 466 Danish Jews arrived in Theresienstadt, as shown here in Erich's work entitled Arrival of Danish Jews at Theresienstadt. Most Danish Jews were able to flee to Sweden with the help of the Danish resistance, but some were interned in Denmark and then deported. It was believed that the Danish government negotiated a special deal for them, as they arrived well-dressed, they didn't have to wear a yellow star, and most importantly, they were not deported to killing centers and other concentration camps. Despite that, 53 Danish Jews still died in Theresienstadt from malnutrition and disease. The Danish king had requested a visit from the International Red Cross, as there were rumors circulating that Jewish people were being murdered in gas chambers. To hinder these rumors, the Nazis invited the Red Cross to come visit Theresienstadt. Thus, an effort to beautify the ghetto began. Gardens were planted, barracks were renovated, buildings repainted, sidewalks scrubbed, gazebos built, and cultural events planned, such as a children's opera and a soccer team. In the image here, we see a young woman who is scrubbing the sidewalks. Behind her, we see an elderly couple peering through the window of a building. As part of the pretense for the Red Cross, the Nazis vacated the ground floors of certain buildings along a carefully planned route the Red Cross would take, and furnished them with decent beds, wardrobes, and chairs to make it seem as if they were taking really good care of the elderly. Erich calls out this farce by calling this work house arrest for the old and infirm. At the same time that this beautification effort was happening, 7,500 prisoners were being deported east to concentration camps and killing centers, so that the ghetto seemed less crowded, and to also get rid of the sick, elderly, and orphan children. When the Red Cross arrived, they took a 6-hour tour along a carefully planned route, and they reported back favorably. Even though Erich was not involved in the painter's circle and was not on the Nazis' list to round up, seeing this event unfold made him feel very fearful for his life and Elsa's life. He decided to eliminate the captions, slogans, and titles on his artwork and cut up most of the work into pieces, even if there was nothing incriminating in the images and text. Examples of this destruction are seen here, where we can see the images are cut up and they are removed of their captions. Shortly after his attempt to destroy his artwork, Erich was sent to a clandestine construction site to build residences for the German central authorities. While he was away, Elsa was protected from deportation, as it was law to protect the family members of essential workers, meaning they were not allowed to be deported. During this time that Erich was away for work, Elsa managed to hide his artwork under the wooden floorboards of her barracks, protecting them for the duration of the war. After liberation, Elsa retrieved the hidden fragments of Erich's artwork from her barracks. Erich began his first recreations of the artwork in Czechoslovakia, where the couple lived for many years after the war. After having their 2 children, named Mira and Rami, the family emigrated to Israel. Erich and Elsa are pictured here in Israel in 1983. Israel is where Erich began a complete recreation of the artwork he had started during those difficult years in Theresienstadt. As he said, I put all the fragments together and I wrote the missing words next to the picture fragments so that every survivor of Terezin was able to see and understand their meaning. The collection, termed a concise encyclopedia of ghetto life in Theresienstadt, is comprised of 3 parts: the original artwork made in Tracystadt, the restored and repainted artwork from post-war Czechoslovakia, and the final revised versions from Israel. Erich's daughter, Mira, said that her family's album of cartoons was a key part of their family library growing up, and she and her brother would often flip through the pages, commenting on the bright colors and the cartoon figures, not understanding the true story behind the images. It was only when they were adults did they learn the true stories of the artwork from their own research and investigations. The experiences that Erich and Elsa endured during the Holocaust haunted them for the rest of their lives, and it was through Erich's artwork from Theresienstadt that he was able to tell some of his story. Erich's artwork is unique in the broad spectrum of artwork created by prisoners in concentration camps and ghettos because he chose to focus on the everyday. As Erich said, I didn't waste time crying over the monstrous behavior of the Nazi regime. We knew that. I didn't waste my precious material on the heroes of the ghetto. I just wanted to record the everyday, even banal. The images of everyday life from Erich's work are presented to us in a cartoon satirical style with sarcastic slogans and captions to showcase the absurd and bizarre quality of life in Theresienstadt, where death, starvation, and deportation were happening at the same time as entertainment and culture. Erich's use of cartoons, satire, and dark humor do not mean that he found life in the ghetto amusing. Rather, he uses these tools to highlight the absurdity and employs laughter as a defense mechanism for making life more tolerable in spite of a harsh reality. All right, now we are going to look at some of the images from the exhibition together. I will ask you some questions, and if you guys could please type your answers in the chat box feature that Wendy described at the beginning. Her name is ILHMEC, Wendy Singer, and she will read off your answers to me as we go. So this is the first image we're going to look at together. It's entitled Competitors for Potatoes. So my questions for you with this image: why do you think this artwork has this title? And what do you see in the painting that supports your answer? And I'll give you a few seconds to think about that and to write your answers to Wendy, if you would please.
Okay, so we already have some comments coming in, Megan. The birds and mice want the potatoes too. There's rats that are fighting for it. The mice are as hungry as the people and they want to be fed as well.
Yep, right. Great. Any more? Is that we got?
You also see the vultures coming in to get the food from the mice. So it's a whole layered effect that we're seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Great. Exactly, yes. So you guys pointed out a lot of elements in the work. Thank you. You see the potatoes on the ground, you see the mice, you see the crows, you see the garbage pile.
I have one more comment, Megan, that I think is important. It highlights the desperation for food in the ghetto and the lack of access to it. It also shows how luxuries mean little without access to food because of her fur coat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great comments. Yes. Thank you all for looking closely with me. So yes, one of the aspects that Erich highlights is the inhumane living conditions in the camp. So like you all said, in this image, we see an elderly woman who is fighting rats and birds for scraps of food in the garbage pile. Elderly prisoners face some of the harshest conditions in Theresienstadt. They were given the fewest rations of food, as food was primarily saved for the young and strong who performed labor in the ghetto. Oftentimes, these people were left to find any scraps on their own or barter their few personal belongings for an extra morsel of sustenance. All right, the next image we're looking at here, we also see images of overcrowded barracks, as in this piece entitled "My First Night in the Ghetto, Overcrowded," which, as the title suggests, depicts Erich's first night in the ghetto. So my questions for you with this piece are, what do you see in this image, first off? And how do you think the people in this image feel? And also, how does this artwork make you feel when you look at it? What emotions or adjectives or words come to mind when you are looking at this piece? And again, I'll give you a few minutes to type your answers to Wendy.
Okay, I'm already getting some private chats. A feeling of disorganization and clutter and overwhelmingness.
Great.
Also, frightening people. The bald man looks like a scary person.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, his exaggerated facial expression. Yep. I see that too. Anything else?
Just the crowdedness, because there is someone laying on the floor, a bed on the floor.
Right, yeah. So in the title, it says overcrowded. And when I look at this, I feel a lot of those same emotions too, with just the sheer number of people and beds and belongings all packed so close together in this image. So thank you all again for your comments. So in this image, we see Erich, who is, he's seen here on the floor towards the front of the image, with his suitcase and his belongings kind of strewn all about and around him. Despite the fact that he was sick with a fever at this time, he could find nowhere to sleep, as all of the bunks were already filled to capacity, which we can see and kind of contributes to that feeling of overwhelming. The physician, who is the scary man in the white, tells him that to find a bed, he needs some vitamin P, meaning privilege. So even having a place to rest your head at night was not a guarantee here. All right, we also see images of death in Erich's artwork, as in this piece entitled "A Farewell Until We Meet Again in the Mass Grave." So my questions for you this time: how does this image comment on death? And what surprises you about this image? And if you could, again, please type your comments to Wendy.
The man in the bin looks close to death.
Mm-hmm. Yep, talking about the man on the other side of the window here.
Unsure if the visitor is coming or going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is kind of unclear, since he has his big backpack, he has a suitcase. He's coming or he's leaving.
The nurse is Jewish.
Yep, we see
she's Jewish star.
Yep, she's wearing a Star of David.
He knows death is ahead. It says until, not if.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good insight there too. Until we meet again in the mass grave. All right, great. Thank you again for your comments. So in this image, as you guys pointed out, we see this elderly man who is in his hospital bed, and he's bidding farewell to another German Jew who is being sent on a transport out east, presumably probably to a killing center or concentration camp. So we said, is he coming or he's going? He's actually being deported out east. And this is their farewell to each other. So with grim humor, the elderly man says, "See you in the mass grave," in his goodbye to his friend. All right, amid the dark themes of the previous images, Erich also highlighted some moments of niceties in his artwork. So this time, as we look at this image and the title, I'd like for you all to tell me, what does this image suggest about resistance or response to what was happening inside Theresienstadt? So this one will help too if you think about the title too.
The ability to bring something normal, to make things normal with flowers.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
They find whatever joy they can.
Mm-hmm.
A comment, I think people look for happiness even in dire circumstances,
Mm-hmm.
and still bringing in the beauty of the outside world.
Yeah, yeah, great. Great comments to that. Thank you so much. So this image, we see a young girl who is an agricultural worker, and she's smuggling flowers into the ghetto. So it was actually forbidden to cut or have any flowers in your barracks, but people still did it anyways. Why do we think they would risk their lives to do so? I think, in a world that was bleak and dreary, having a symbol of growth and beauty brought hope to prisoners and allowed them to maintain their humanity. So all of those things that you guys said is what I was feeling with this image too.
Quick question on that last slide, because it's particular to this slide.
Yes.
Is it possible to translate some of the words on the brick wall?
Yes, I have the captions right here. So it says, working in agriculture, smuggling under her coat, forbidden grains into the ghetto. So a lot of times with the captions on the image, Erich kind of either helped explain what's happening in the picture, or he kind of made his own commentary. He uses some dark humor sometimes, but this time kind of just helped explain what's happening. So that's what that caption says in the background.
Also, it looks like he signed this Eli or
Yes.
Ellie.
Yes.
Can you comment on that?
Yes, great observation, whoever made that observation. So if you look moving forward, actually, I challenge you to all look for his signature in the rest of the images that we look at together. His signature is always Eli in all of the works that he made in Israel during the 1970s and 80s, these kind of recreations of his work, he signed Eli. You'll also notice that despite the fact that this artwork and all the really brightly colored artwork that was made in Israel in the 1970s and 80s, they're all backdated to 1943, 1942, 1944, the original date of when he created the work in Theresienstadt. So it can be kind of confusing when you're looking at these works and it says Theresienstadt Ghetto too underneath it. So you might think that these were the images that he actually made in Theresienstadt itself back in the 1940s and early 1940s, but these were all the works that he recreated in Israel. And ultimately, I think it was just his choice, since this work was kind of a continuation, and the work that he did in Israel kind of finished the work that he started in Theresienstadt. He chose to backdate them, to write Theresien, and to sign his name Eli on all of them. So you will see that on all of them going forward. But great question and great observation. All right, so we actually have one more image to look at together. And looking at this image, who do you think these people are and what are they doing here? And I'll give you a few seconds again to type your answers to Wendy.
A wedding.
A wedding, yes, exactly. So another happy moment captured in Erich's work is a wedding in the ghetto. So here we see a young cleaning lady and a cook. You can tell by the broom and the chef hat. And they're seen under a wedding canopy for their wedding ceremony. So marrying a cook was a good catch for obvious reasons. Hopefully his new bride would be able to share in his close access to food. Weddings were possible in Theresienstadt, where rabbi prisoners became the officiants. So again, against all odds, people looked forward to the future and life once the war was over.
Thank you.
All right. In 1983, two philanthropists, one of which was Erich's nephew, purchased the collection from Erich and subsequently donated it to the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust via the Jewish Federation Council of Greater Los Angeles. The first exhibition of the collection was shown in 1984 at the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust, and since then, there have been the exhibition has been shown in many museums across the country, and a catalog of the collection has also been created, which is seen here. Erich himself lived a very modest life after the war, and he said, "I was not a famous painter, I was just a little man." He initially began painting houses for work when he was in Israel, and he later returned to his work in commercial design, where he worked as a window decorator for a department store in Tel Aviv until his retirement.
Is he still alive, Megan?
He has passed away. Both him and Elsa passed away in early 2000s, and I think Elsa passed away in 2010. So Erich created over 150 artworks to document life in Theresienstadt. You can see over half of those images in the hallways of Illinois Holocaust Museum on your next visit. Erich was often quoted as saying, "For me, not to paint would be not to live," which is a testament to the great resistance and perseverance of human spirit that he showed in creating these images, and the wonderful gift that he has left the rest of us to tell the world what happened to so many who faced unspeakable challenges as prisoners in Theresienstadt. So thank you all for allowing me to share these stories with you today. And if you guys have any more questions, please send them to Wendy and I can answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Megan. And the tagline of our museum is to remember the past and transform the future. And this is certainly a gift that Erich has left us and his wife rescued for us. So we are so glad that we have it at the museum, and we are so glad that we have you to be our brilliant expert on the exhibition. So we have a couple questions already. One person noticed that some of the paintings were in black and white and then they became in color. Is there any specific reason that you know about that? And that it turned to color eventually, and what can you say on that?
Yes, definitely. So a lot of Actually, I'm going to pull up my presentation again just for visual aids. So a lot of the images, let's look at this one as an example. A lot of the images from Theresienstadt that he first created, they don't have a ton of color to them, or this one too. We can see in the upper right corner. Oops. They're not as finished as the images kind of all around it. So that's, you can kind of tell it's a visual hint as to which year a lot of these images were made. The ones that are brightly colored, that look finished, are the ones that were made in Israel, and the ones that don't have as many colors, are kind of rough around the edges. Those are the ones that he had just started in Theresienstadt. And that's, I mean, that's really due to him being able to use the limited access to art materials that he had from his job, also not having as much time to devote to making them, you know, the finished products that he kind of envisioned that they would be. So that's kind of why there's that difference.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us a little bit about how their relationship was in the ghetto? It seems like they didn't live together in that one painting where he was, you know, the one that he was talking with the doctor and the suitcase on the floor. Did he live in the same place ever as Elsa?
Right, great. Yes, great question. So they actually lived in separate barracks. The barracks were mostly divided by gender, male and female. So males all live together, females all live together. It's a good question whether or not, or to the extent to which, how much they got to interact with each other. I have read that through Erich's job in the technical department, where he worked on like the set designs and the ghetto theater design, things like that. That job did give him a bit of freedom to be able to move across the camp, maybe more so than other prisoners had. So presumably since he did have kind of more freedom to wander throughout the camp, he was able to see Elsa, at least occasionally. So they were able to stay connected, at least somewhat.
Thank you, thank you. Do you know what the Danish had over the Nazis that helped the Danish prisoners have a better life at this particular camp?
That's a great question. I don't know the specifics of how they negotiated the deal. But like I said, it was assumed that the Danish king had made a deal with the Nazis in order for the Danish Jews to have that special treatment that we talked about when we were looking at this slide. So what the specifics of that deal was, I'm not entirely sure.
Okay, thank you. And I have one more question here, and please continue to type if there's something else into the chat privately to me. And that is, you mentioned that Leo Haas was one of the artists in the painter circle, I believe it was called, who survived. What happened to him?
Yes. So he was the only one that did survive from the group, which is why his picture is him of an older man too. So he was sent to Auschwitz with the others. The man on the left here, Bedřich Freda, he was also sent to Auschwitz along with everyone else. He ended up dying of dysentery shortly after he arrived there. And some of the other artists didn't even make it to Auschwitz. They died in the little fortress in Theresienstadt as well. Leo did survive. He ended up going to a few other camps, including Mauthausen and Ebensee from Auschwitz. But he survived. And after liberation, he did go back to Theresienstadt and find out that his wife had also survived the war, luckily. And that's where he found out that most of his friends and other artists had died. And specifically, he actually found out that Biedrich and Biedrich's wife both had died. And they had a son at the time who, was essentially left without parents at that point. So Leo actually, and his wife actually adopted Biedrich and his wife's son. So
wow.
Yeah, it's really a pretty incredible story.
Wow, that is a find. That is a find of information, and pretty unbelievable. Well, thank you so much, Meghan. Just a wonderful presentation, and we learned a lot. And I appreciate you and what you presented here. Check out all of our upcoming events on our events page. I put that in the chat, so if anyone wants to click it or just Google Illinois Holocaust Museum events, and it'll take you to that page. June is a all-star lineup of wonderful programming. In honor of the anniversary of liberation, this whole year has our tagline, our hashtag, if you will, is Liberation 2020. And in honor of Liberation 2020, we are having a series of lunch and learns in June. If you are a Winston Churchill fan, you do not want to miss out. Next Friday, June 5th, we have The Legacy of Winston Churchill, a conversation with Dr. Rob Havers, the president and CEO of the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. So he's going to be talking about Winston Churchill's legacy. And then we're following up with another lunch and learn about Winston Churchill and the Jews, Zionism, Holocaust, and lessons of the 20th century, with a special man named Lee Pollock, who heads up he's a trustee and an advisor to the board of the Winston Churchill International Society. So that's going to be great. 2 lunch and learns, and then 2 extra special programs that I want to mention that are not to be missed. I'm talking about all-star, blockbuster, or as we like to say, world-class programming at the museum. We have a commemoration for the 155th anniversary of Juneteenth, and that day marks the end of slavery in the United States of America. And we have an incredible woman, a civil rights attorney, who is the president and counsel general of the, oh my goodness, where did it go?
The NAACP Legal Defense Fund.
You're amazing. And the author of On the Courthouse Lawn, which is a bestseller that came out about 10 years ago, and it just got republished. So it will be there. It is moderated by a local journalist who's a national journalist, Alex Kotlowitz, who is the best-selling author of There Are No Children Here. And then the following week on June 16th, we have a book and author with a best-selling author who is so special. She has been on the Today Show and has presented internationally. It's called The Choice, Embrace the Possible, a conversation with Dr. Edith Eger. If you have not read that memoir, it is a must. It is incredible. She has an incredible story. And she became a psychologist who focused on resiliency. And I think in this time in our world, we could all use an inspirational, motivational type of lesson learned from Dr. Eger. So please join us on Tuesday, June 16th, and check out that book. We also have a book club the week before if you want to discuss the book. So check all of that out online. Thank you, Meghan. Thank you, everybody. And we will see you soon. Join us again for all these programs.
Thank you. Thank you all for all your questions and comments too.
Bye-bye.